Welcome to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects the food on your plate to the bigger world. I am your host, Dana DePrima. Emma Smalley didn't grow up on a farm. She didn't inherit any land. She didn't have a plan to raise goats, build a herd, or figure out how to make a farm work alongside a full-time job. She answered a Craigslist ad. And that one decision set off a chain reaction that tells you almost everything you need to know about what it actually takes to become a farmer in the United States today. Because this episode isn't just about goats. It's about how people get into farming when there's no clear path in. It's about land that exists but isn't accessible. It's about learning without generational knowledge. And it's about what happens when something as essential as food depends on people figuring it out as they go. Emma's story starts with mentorship, loss, and 120 goats she couldn't possibly take home. It moves through years of piecing together land access, competing with developers, commuting hours just to keep the farm alive, and building a business in the margins of time. Along the way, you hear something that comes up again and again when I talk with farmers. Most farms are not full-time. They are built on top of other jobs, other responsibilities, other realities that people don't see when they picture farming. And underneath all of it, there's a bigger question. If nearly 40% of farmland is expected to change hands in the next 20 years, who actually gets access to it? Emma worked with American Farmland Trust to find her way to land, but even with support, her path wasn't straightforward. It was built through relationships, timing, and persistence. This conversation gets into all of it: land access, succession, isolation, community, and what it really looks like to build a farm from scratch. Because food is not just food. It's people, it's systems, and sometimes it's one person standing in a field trying to make it all work. I'm your host, Dana DePrima, and this is One Bite is Everything.
The idea of growing food is very appealing to me. And so I thought I was going to end up just like growing some vegetables in my yard and doing like a farmer's market type thing, something small, market gardeny. And I ended up answering a Craigslist ad, which was very strange. And it was just like, hey, have you ever thought about being on a farm? And I'm like, yeah, I have thought about that. So I answered this ad, which it wasn't really selling anything. He was basically like a 70-year-old man who had no children. He was struggling to run this goat farm on his own, and he just wanted some help. But he's like, I cannot pay you, which was fine for me at the time because I had a 9-month-old baby. I had my full-time job. I have, 3 other kids. So I couldn't commit to like a part-time farming gig. But I could just hang out with this old guy and help him clean his barn. And I was so in love with this man. And we were just in love with each other because he had somebody to talk to about his thing he was so into. And I was just eating it up. He was like, oh, you can just grow some vegetables here and it'll be cool. But the goats, there was something about it that I just fell in love with. And so I worked with him for a few months and he taught me how to run the tractor and different goat maintenance things. And then I got a call from his wife and she said that he had been hit by a car while he was on the tractor and that she needed me to come over because nobody else knew how to run that other tractor to feed the goats. And so it was my first actual grief and I was like completely heartbroken. So I just love this man so much. And then she was like, well, what am I going to do with all these goats, And I was like, oh, I'll take them. Like he had like 120 goats. I could not take 120 goats onto my half acre. So she let me farm there. I would drive 20 minutes either way. And then his best friend has a big piece of land down the road and was like, you can come here. And so I rented from him for a few years. In the meantime, looking for a farm around Buffalo, metropolitan area of Buffalo, because I want to be close to, there's a very strong goat meat market because we're a secondary resettlement city. So there's a lot of immigrant population in our area. So there's a high demand, but I didn't have anywhere to go. I didn't have the farm and the land, the cost of land in Erie County around the city of Buffalo was insane. And so it took me years, and I worked through American Farmland Trust and their first generation farmer program and was able to eventually find this place, but it was a real journey.
When you say the prices were insane, what do you mean?
Well, first of all, you're going up against developers who want to take this field and turn it into like a cul-de-sac. And like, I don't have developer money, do okay because I run a credit union, but I can't compete with that. So it would go up and you don't even have a chance to really try to bid on it because it's quickly snapped up by these developers, right? But also finding the amount of land in a way that was cost effective for me was impossible. Like if I had wanted to do a market garden, it would have been easier because you can find 5 acre pieces or 10 acre pieces, but I needed enough land to graze a herd of goats, which is more than that.
Farming isn't just land and economics, it's legacy. It's knowledge being passed on. It's who gets let in. Even with support from places like American Farmland Trust, you can hear how much of this journey wasn't linear or strategic. It was pieced together through relationships, timing, and a lot of figuring it out as she went. And in a way, that tension is the real story between something deeply relational and something that's increasingly transactional. You have this very intimate, almost accidental entry into farming, up against a system where land is getting snapped up by developers before someone like her even gets a shot. It makes you realize that access isn't just about money. It's about proximity, connection, and whether you even get to be in the room when the opportunities show up. So how much land were you looking for?
At least 60 acres. Old dairies work well, but really I ended up having to move several counties away down to the bottom of New York State in Allegheny County to be able to afford the land. Allegheny County is one of the poorest counties in New York. And so it's cheap to live here because there's not anything here at all except a lot of pretty hills and land. I still commute 3 days a week, an hour and a half to be able to have that job, which I do love, and have this, which I do love also.
And what are you nearest to then? You're still commuting back to Buffalo or?
Yeah. I go to Lancaster to Pima and Buffalo 3 days a week, so it's an hour and a half. Yeah. The jobs out here, you can work for the town or you can work for the school. Those are your choices.
And in terms of the market for your goats, they're meat goats, so you're still running them to the Buffalo area, or do you have more options because you're in the bottom of New York, as you said?
Yeah, I do still take them up to the city and I don't sell retail. I just can't. It's just too difficult to manage individual customers because of my work schedule. So I just take them wholesale up and sell them in a big trailer full.
You sell the goats to the processor?
Yeah, there's a processor that's up in Niagara County, but I also just take them a lot of times to the auction house in Springville. And then people come in and buy them to eat there.
And I mean, this market is predominantly looking for halal meat. Is there a certain way that you have to raise it, or is it just the method of slaughter that counts it as halal?
I've heard both ways that it is the method of slaughter predominantly, but there are other more strict guidelines around like the animal living a good life, which I've never pursued halal certification. I just haven't had to. Like the demand is so high, I've sold out every year. So there's no reason to, I guess, continue with that.
There's a perception that things like halal are rigid systems, but in practice, it becomes a balance between ethics, demand, and what's actually sustainable on the ground. And the demand is real. Goat meat consumption is one of the fastest growing globally, with over 70% of the world's population eating it regularly, largely driven by cultural and immigrant communities. But the real constraint isn't demand, it's winter. Emma's farm doesn't scale based on opportunity. It's capped by how many goats she can physically house through the cold. Goats can reproduce fast, often doubling a herd within a year, which sounds like growth, but it also creates pressure. More animals means more space, more feed, more infrastructure. So the question stops being, how much can I grow, and becomes, what can I actually sustain? And what's your capacity in terms of goat production?
I have about 90 goats right now. My capacity is really limited to because we live in a cold climate. You can only house so many over the winter. They're not really designed to be here, so they're not down with the snow. I do have plans to like expand. Right now, we're using the old dairy barn, but I'm about maxed out at 90 with how many I can keep over winter there.
So you keep 90 over a winter and then they kid in the spring?
Yeah, we do usually kid in the spring. I've done fall kiddings before too, but they double quite a bit faster than a beef herd. So you can really get your numbers up very quickly, which is appealing. And they're a manageable size for me. They push me around and they're no joke, but it's a lot different than being pushed around by a great big cow. So
I can see that. And what kind of goats do you have?
I have at this point mostly Kiko goats, but I have some boar mixed in there. I started Rogers goats were mostly boar goats and a little bit of dairy, but I found that the Kiko goats they grow slower, but they're a bit more resilient in that they need less. I feel like they're more true to nature in that they haven't been domesticated to the same degree. And that's just like an inference. That's an anecdotal observation. It's not like science or anything. But I like how hardy they are.
Now tell me a little bit because I mean the struggle to find land was real for you.
Yeah.
But that's not the only thing, right? Like you said, you fell into farming, you found Roger. You guys had a relationship, he had goats, you end up with his goats in maybe an act of homage. And somewhere between those days and now, you have a business and a plan. And I'd love to understand how that shaped for you.
Yeah, I feel like running the credit union was sort of in preparation for me to be able to do this as a business. Is like I knew the business part. Now it's goats that you're selling. So it's being able to know your way around those financials is important. So that was 2019 when I started with Roger. And it did give me this false sense of confidence because when you start, you don't know what you don't know. And I think I really underestimated the value of that man as a mentor. And so, like, first of all, farming is just more fun with a buddy, just straight up. It's just more fun. And you get more out of it. And so, having him and then having his wife for a short time and then having his best friend to help guide me through those things I didn't know was like really invaluable. And I think that is part of what's missing now because of how society has changed, right? And like, it used to be that like your neighbor was also a farmer and your parents were also farmers. And so you had all these resources of all of this generational knowledge at an arm's length. And now it's like the next farm is, I'm lucky that it is just over the hill, but other people, it's further and further away. And so you have to like intentionally build these networks of connection to be able to effectively support your goal and your dream and your business.
I think farmers are just, I mean, maybe geographically and socially more isolated than they used to be.
Yes. I think that you have to intentionally form and find your community. And like, I do feel like that was when I first came here, because now my community is in Erie County. We started the Good Farmers Guild of Western New York. So that was just like people like us that were like not young, I'm not young, but they were new starting farmers. And they were like first generation in a lot of cases, just like creating an intentional community in Western New York to share resources, just to have that sense of community. And then I left it. Now they're like an hour and a half away. And so like I'm alone out here in beautiful Allegheny County. And luckily I just happened to be adopted by the people up the road, which is like an old beef farmer. And then there's another gentleman who is an old dairyman. And they're just like these retired guys who just are watching me struggle under my tractor to fix it. And they're like, hey, we can come help you. And then we're making hay together. And, they come over and check on me. So like I have had to reestablish that community and I got really lucky. But I think that is part of having a successful farm that people not forget about, but it's just like maybe if they have it, they take it for granted. Or if you don't have it, you don't know that you're missing it. Or you watch YouTube videos, but it's just not the same. It's not the same as having someone next to you being like, this is going to be fine. I've done this before. I'm going to fix you. I'm going to help you. It's really different, you know? So I think that was something that I had to learn kind of the hard way.
I mean, I don't know how you re-engineer that. It sounds like you have to struggle to find it yourself, but that kind of community component is super important. But it's also a signal that our system has some pretty pathetic networks or lack of networks that we need. This is our food.
Yeah, that we need. And we just have to be intentional about creating those, right? It's people centered, like we're creating food for people, for human people that need connection. So these things all do go together. It's not just in a vacuum.
There's something interesting in how community shows up here. It's not built first, it's built because things get hard. It's almost reactive. You struggle, something breaks, you feel the isolation, and then you realize you can't do this alone. And what replaces that gap isn't formal support, it's proximity. Older farmers down the road, shared labor, knowledge passed in real time. It's messy, unstructured, but it works in a way systems often don't, which kind of exposes the bigger issue. We've designed a food system that depends on people operating at their limit, and then left the community up to chance. That's partly where organizations like American Farmland Trust come in. They weren't just created to protect land, but to respond to this exact fragility: access, mentorship, continuity. Trying to make something more intentional out of what's often left to luck. Because when community isn't built in, resilience becomes individual instead of collective. And that's a risky way to sustain something as essential as food. Well, in our bigger community in the United States, we're not a country that's predominantly goat meat eating, right?
Yeah, I know people are always very confused that I raised them for me, but I'm like, but the whole rest of the world does eat it. It's just here that we think it's weird. Like we're an outlier in that it has never caught on as one that we consume regularly.
Do you feel like that's shifting at all?
Yeah, I think a little bit. There's a place here locally, and it's like a high-end butcher, and he specifically does connect with local farms. And he's like, I have a hard time like even selling lamb. He's like, I'll take a couple goats, but like there are people who just haven't even had lamb. So to get them to have goat is like a bit of a stretch. So I think maybe it is becoming a little bit more common, but there's still demand and it just works for me. And like their personality is why I pick them and not sheep. Like I do find that sheep have a reputation for a reason, in my opinion. But yeah, it just works for me for a lot of reasons. The demand is there. I like them as individuals, and it actually works really well for the land that we ended up getting, because this is the first time this farm has ever been out of that family. But it was an 1850s dairy. They had the Baker cheese factory here, so this was like a big time dairy. And when he stopped farming 40 years ago, all of the pasture land just grew up in honeysuckle and buckthorn and hawthorn. And so it's not great for cows anymore or dairy, but it's super good for goats who just want to browse on those trees. So the fact that this land was abandoned and has grown up is actually very good for my particular farming business. So it works really well.
That's an interesting point because as a young farmer, a landless farmer looking for land, what you're looking for is size, the location. Is it close enough to a market? Can my kids go to school here? Like there are all of these check marks. And ultimately, the land has to fit what you want to do. I mean, if you
Yeah.
can't raise cattle there, then you shouldn't be raising cattle, right?
Yeah.
So you might have to pivot what you're farming or pivot what you're looking for to meet the farming that you want to do, right?
It is. And I think that was a really helpful part of working with the American Farmland Trust is like, you know what you want to do, but having to write it down and explain it to someone else is very clarifying. And it's very clear in there. Like, what are the different things that you need? What are your priorities? What's negotiable? What's non-negotiable? And yeah, you're talking about all the check boxes, right? So it's like, I'm looking at these farms and it's like, the house is crazy or the barn is crazy. And you got to pick one of those two, for it to be affordable. So when we moved here, they'd taken really good care of the house. But like I said, the farm hadn't been used as a farm in 40 years. The barn roof was shot. We had to replace the barn roof. There's no fencing left. Like, you got to pick your poison here and decide what can you live with. And I think that's true even of people who do inherit land from their families. You're inheriting something that someone else took care of. Maybe you don't want to do monoculture corn anymore and you want to do something different. You're going to have to change that land to suit your needs. So I think that's definitely something that you really have to think about.
So, when was that plan put in place that you worked with AFT on?
I mean, I started working with them. I went to a couple of their classes when Roger was still alive in 2019. And so I was already starting my search, and we had some preliminary conversations about me taking over his land, which they help with also. They can help you with a transition plan. But since that didn't happen, I would say probably in 2020 is when I started in earnest building that plan with them and posting my little like profile on the website and hoping some farmer would pick me, or I would find some farmer that would be open to transitioning the land to goats.
And ultimately, did you find this old dairy farm through that link?
This one I did not. There was one I thought I was going to get, and I had been working with their navigator. I do want to talk about this part because it's very important, is that when you are transitioning farmland, the people who are giving you this land or selling you this land, it's not just their business, right? It's like, this guy, he was born on this farm. You know, he had lived there his whole life. His dad had farmed there his whole life. His grandfather had farmed there his whole life. And so there was this emotional attachment to this land that makes the sale of that land very difficult. Like, they have an emotional price in their mind that is based on how they feel about the land, not necessarily the actual value of that land. Additionally, because the margins are so slim for farmers, this is this man's entire retirement. Like, he's not, there's no like magical money coming from anywhere else. There's no pension or anything. So like, he is also trying to get the most he can so that he can live out the rest of his days somewhere. So it just makes that negotiation so delicate, I think is what I want to say. And that deal, you know, he drug his feet on it. And I remember him calling me the week after I had put my offer in on this farm and saying, I think we're ready. And I'm thinking, oh no, I already found something, because you just didn't really want to sell it to me, is the thing. And you know what? He didn't. He died on that farm. And his wife sold it after he died because he just wasn't actually ready to retire, you know?
Do you think that's why so much farmland ends up transitioning to developers just because of the price? And that's your retirement program?
I think that's part of it. I think the lack of succession planning is the root cause of that. Even Roger, like, he should have been retired. Like, he had no business doing that type of labor at 70, right? But he just didn't want to face that. That's true. They want to do it because you love it. And he had no kids and he had no plan. And so what ended up happening after he passed and I left was a neighbor farmer then took that farm over and has beef there now. But that wasn't a plan that he had. That just happened to work out, right? So yeah, I think the lack of succession planning is part of the problem. And the fact that this is your retirement money is part of the problem. Wayne felt very deeply like he kept saying, I want to keep it green. Like, most farmers really want to keep it in farming. If they have a love for it, I think they want to, right? But then it's hard. And this path has already been carved out that it is very easy to just sell it to a developer, sell it to somebody who's doing solar, right? That's the other thing. I guess it's like path of least resistance.
There's a bigger tension sitting underneath all of this. A massive amount of farmland is about to change hands, but not in the way we think. In the US, nearly 40% of farmland is expected to transfer ownership in the next 20 years, and a huge portion of that isn't going to heirs or new farmers. It's being sold off, often to developers or investors. So on paper, there's land becoming available, but in reality, it's bottlenecked, not just by price, but by something harder to solve: attachment. This isn't just property, it's identity, legacy, and in many cases, someone's entire life's work and retirement plan. That's why, even with support from American Farmland Trust, the issue doesn't fully resolve. You can create programs, funding pathways, transition plans, but you can't force someone to be ready to let go of something that defines them. So the real question isn't just how do we get land to new farmers? It's how do we support people through the emotional process of passing it on? Because the solution likely isn't purely economic, it's relational. Earlier, slower transitions, trust built over time, models where farmers stay connected to the land even as they step back. Otherwise, what we're left with is this paradox. Land is available, but not accessible, and a system waiting on human readiness that doesn't run on a timeline. And on your farm right now, what are your goals you sort of set out in 2019, and here we are?
We got some grants from the NRCS to put in fencing and water lines. So this year will be our first year doing like truly rotational grazing, which is really good for the land and the goats, which I'm really excited about. And I think right now I want to work for 10 more years. And at that point, I know I'll be able to like focus on the farming. I think that is my real thing is I want to be able to give it as much time as I do my other endeavors, right? Is like I could be doing different things if I had more time, but I just right now it's like not an afterthought, but it's not getting the attention that it deserves, I feel.
So you want to work 10 more years at the credit union and then farm full time.
Yeah, which is backward. It's my retirement. I know I just talked all about how you know, there's an age where you have to like give that up. And I think about that all the time. And my husband and I talk about all the time. We don't have any kids that want to do this, but there's Alfred State College here. They have an ag school down the road. So I'm just like, that will be my plan is to find somebody who's into it and have them mentor with me for some time and then they can take it over because I want it to stay undeveloped and we don't have development pressure out here yet. So that feels good. There's not imminent, like no one's trying to build a Walmart or anything, but this place has a lot of history and I want somebody who's going to love that about it.
So you're going to put that succession plan in place in a kind of a similar way to how you took over a farm.
Yeah, definitely. Because like I get to steward this land, right? It's not mine. I just get to have it for a little while. I feel so honored to be the next person to take care of it. And I want to really do it justice and give it to somebody who's going to love it that hard.
Yeah, so it's not just the animals that people fall in love with, they fall in love with the land.
Oh, it's the land. It's the land for sure for me.
What's your favorite part of being a goat farmer?
I like the variety because you get to do so many different kinds of things. It's like quasi veterinary. There's like all the science of that. I like the physical labor of making hay. I like driving a tractor. I like doing the accounting bit. Like I like that I get to do all the different parts and they all come together to this thing. And like I get to walk outside every day and stand in the middle of a giant field and feel very small. And it makes me feel really good.
And now that you have land, that hurdle has been jumped. What are the biggest challenges that you face as a goat farmer?
It's a big mortgage, like that's really the thing is like Leonard inherited this farm at 600 acres and he sold pieces of it off and I have 177 of it left. And that's sort of how he lived. And I just don't have that same luxury of not having a mortgage on it, right? So it's just, can I make these numbers work? That is the hardest part.
Does that feel like a lot of pressure?
Only if I think about it too hard.
Mm.
No, it's just you get in the rhythm, right? And I am really lucky to have my off-farm job. And in a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways, I feel like if I didn't have that, I could make more out of the farm. So it's a double-edged sword, like having that off-farm income, right? Because it gives you a safety net, which allows you to be less aggressive.
Now you're getting into your rotational grazing. What would be this next kind of thing?
The man who sold me the Kiko goats was like very into the breeding and he would like really nerd out about the bloodlines. And that's not like my thing, but I was like, it would be cool to be more intentional about the genetics. And I think just like more intensive management of the herd. Like right now, I do breed specifically for maternal instinct. So if they're a bad mom, they're gone at the next auction because I work off farm. So I can't be out there feeding your babies. That's your job. You guys got to feed your babies. But I think I could get like deeper into that and just have like excellent quality herd would be like my dream for what I want the farm to be.
You worked also with the young farmers. Is that right?
Yeah, we worked with young farmers and we kind of did a spin-off of our own and created the Good Farmers Guild just because we wanted more freedom to less structure around what we had to meet about and what our policy priorities could be.
This was in Erie County.
Yes, in Erie County. Yeah, it's Good Farmers Guild of Western New York, so technically it's all 8 of the counties on the western side of New York, but predominantly farmers in Erie County.
Okay, so you were working with young farmers and then you created your own group. Explain the flexibility you gained by doing that.
When you go through a national organization, you had to have a specific kind of bent to your work that you did. So you had to pick from these different categories and decide that that was your thing. But we really wanted the flexibility to focus on what we needed locally, which was land access and just community building and resource sharing, which was kind of the focus for Good Farmers Guild.
Emma's story really stays with you because there's no moment where everything clicks into place and the farm just works. Instead, it's constant adjustment, working a full-time job to support the farm, building community when it doesn't exist, making decisions about land, animals, and infrastructure within very real constraints. And I think one of the most important takeaways from this conversation is this. Farming today is not just about growing food. It's about access to land, access to knowledge, access to community. Emma didn't step into a system that was set up for her. She built her way into it through mentorship, through programs like American Farmland Trust's Farms for a New Generation, and through people who showed up at the right time. But that kind of path can't be the only path, because when farmers are isolated, when land is out of reach, when the system depends on people pushing themselves to the edge just to stay in it, that doesn't just affect farmers, it affects all of us. The food system only works if the people inside it can actually sustain themselves, and that's where you come in. Through the 4 Farmers movement, these stories don't just live here, they turn into action, supporting small farmers, helping them stay on their land, making sure they're seen, valued, and backed by the people they feed. If this episode got you thinking, you can take one little step. You can nominate a farmer for a high-impact grant. You can support that grant, or you can start paying closer attention to where your food comes from and who's behind it, because every one of those actions adds up. You can find out more at 4farmersmovement.com. Thanks for listening to One Bite is Everything, the podcast that connects every bite you take to the bigger world. If you enjoyed this episode, I hope you'll take a moment to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It helps more people like you find these stories. This episode was co-produced by Sonia Dillon with sound design and original music by Russell Chappa. I'm your host, Dana DePrima, and I'll see you here again next week. Until then, eat like it matters, because it does.